What up, this is Dart Adams from Dart Adams Living Room. I've been asked a lot of questions about Celtics City since it started airing in March 3rd. I kind of held off on doing it because my contributions to Celtics City don't really get big enough or prominent enough for me to really address things until we get to episodes 4, 5, and 6. 9 episodes. They run from March 3rd, 2025 all the way until April 28th, 2025. So we got time. But I felt like now after episode 5, I should, address some frequently asked questions. And some of them come from, the framing, the ideas, some of the stuff that they talked about, people didn't have a full grasp of. In terms of Bob Cousy's skill level, a lot of people were not around to see Bob Cousy play. They don't understand the nature of the NBA, the BAA coming into the NBA in the 50s. Something that people should know. There were different rules in the NBA, BAA going into the NBA back then where you couldn't touch the ball with the side of your hand. So the reason why they dribbled the ball like this was that. And Bob Cousy was somebody who had mastered how to be able to dribble the ball, handle the ball, pass the ball, do wraparound passes, no-look passes, dimes, throw the ball behind his back with either hand, do inside hand changes, things like this, with limited ability to grip the basketball the way we do it today. There was no palming of the basketball like we do it today. And you gotta remember, Kuz was 6'1". Kuz was not a big man. Bob Cousy was doing things with the basketball that you could only see watching a Boston Celtics game or Harlem Globetrotters game. The best ball handlers in the game were either Harlem Globetrotters or Boston Celtics. You had Marcus Haynes of the Harlem Globetrotters. Later, he left the Harlem Globetrotters after having beef with Abe Saperstein and started the Harlem Wizards. And it was Bob Cousy. And then later on, you had the ball handlers like the Curly Nails, Pablo, Frank Streety, those kind of guys who could do all the tricks with the ball. But this starts from Marcus Haynes and Bob Cousy, okay? And at one point, Bob Cousy was the draw. He was the name in basketball. He was the name, like Jeff Johnson, if you've ever seen The Perfect Gentleman with Eddie Murphy. So anyway, Bill Russell ends up becoming a Boston Celtic largely because he was going to be the first black superstar in the NBA. They explained that the St. Louis franchise did not want to do that. Rochester wasn't going to do it. So he ends up in Boston. Now, he revolutionized the game by playing defense. He revolutionized the game through blocking shots and keeping them in bounds so he could start the break and get into transition. The block starts, he blocks the ball into the hands of the point guard, usually Cousy, or whoever's on the break, pass, scoring. He stops the other people from scoring, which initiates the fast break. And people are under the impression that you played plumbers and blah, blah, blah. No, the way the NBA was due to the fact that college basketball was a bigger draw, hockey was a bigger draw, and baseball, Boston was still a baseball and hockey town. Pro basketball was not as big a draw. To further hammer home things, Jesse Owens would come home from the Olympics being the number 1 athlete in the world and have to do things like race horses or do personal appearances or dance in order to make money because there was no way to monetize his athleticism because there was no pro sprinters. Like, it wasn't like it is now. Jim Thorpe played professional sports all over the place, but it wasn't like he was making a disgusting amount of money like professional athletes make now. You're playing in semi-pro and pro leagues. You're only making so much. There were people with real normal 9-to-5 jobs making more than a famous professional athlete. That's why back in the days you would get a call, be like, hey, you've been drafted by this team in the NBA. And you're like, I got a job selling insurance with a company car out of college. And I'm going to make more money than I would for the months I play for this rinky-dink league. And then once the season's over, you got to get a job anyway. So the economics are very different. I need you to understand that. And also things that they don't talk about in Celtics City are how the Boston Celtics made innovations like the sixth man through Frank Ramsey, and then later you got, the other guys coming off the bench, have the check-ins up coming off the bench for a lot of these guys. Then you go from Bob Cousy retiring, Casey Jones coming up. The Boston Celtics revolutionized the game by using advanced scouting, going and finding places other people couldn't find them, whether it be in looking at colleges, small colleges, black colleges, high schools, because Red was not satisfied with just doing the territorial picks. Also, that's another thing. The territorial draft was really in effect because, again, the NBA pro basketball was not a big draw. They used to have dances to get people to come into the place so that there would be people there for the games. Okay? Pro basketball was not popping. There were multiple leagues. They had to merge leagues. That's where the Minneapolis Lakers and other teams came from. There was the NBDL and the BAA. They merged those together to have the NBA. Okay? So we need to get that through y'all's heads, some of you. Red Auerbach was really hip on trades. He did every job. He sold tickets, did all this other stuff. Now, in terms of like what the Boston Celtics did in terms of sharing the ball, they believed the ball moved faster than when you dribbled it. Pass, 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 pass. The perfect fast break would be pass, pass, pass while people are running. Don't even dribble the ball. One dribble fast breaks. Running after made baskets. This is how the Boston Celtics ethos was. Now, we're going to get up to Willie Knowles. December 26, 1964, Willie Knowles steps into the lineup for the Celtics, who already had 4 black starters, and Tommy Heinsohn gets injured. So Willie Knowles steps in, and the Boston Celtics now have 5 black starters. Now, Texas Western had 4 black starters before they switched to 5 black starters between December 4th, 1965 and March 19th, 1966. The thing that gave them the opportunity to do it and the space to do it was that the Boston Celtics had already done it and ran off like 16 wins in a row after they inserted Willie Knowles in the starting lineup. And then they won the chip that year, the 1965 NBA championship. So it made sense, the 1966 NCAA championship, for Texas Western, to win. But there had been instances of teams with 3 black starters. There was a team with 3 black starters that Bill Russell was on. There was Bill Casey and another guy. There were the 3 black starters, won a championship. You had 3 or 4 black starters on the team out of Loyola, Chicago, that won in 1963. So there was this precedent already there, for how many players you could have playing. Now, I say in one of the episodes that, when I talk about Bill Russell, he was beloved in the South End, Lower Roxbury, and Mattapan. I skipped Dorchester, which would have been North Dorchester. So I really should have said Dorchester or North Dorchester in that episode. It's neither here nor there. But I did say something hilarious. Well, it isn't hilarious because it's factual. I said that we didn't go to South Boston. It was a world away when I was a kid. I said you could go straight down here. You're in Roxbury. You go straight down here and you're in South Boston. Yes, you could. You could take Appleton, go another street, and keep walking, and you were in South Boston. No one ever did it. Now, what's hilarious is that the interview that I did was in South Boston. The interview I did for Murder in Boston was in South Boston because they shared, producers. That's how I got involved in both projects. And also, I did a lot of writing about the Boston Celtics, and anybody you ask was like, you got to talk to Dirk. You got to talk to Howard Bryant. And so we ended up, me and Howard again. So anyways, it was weird, crazy because, I said that we never went to South Boston. I was sitting in South Boston when I said that. My mom passed away 2018. She was in Marion Manor in South Boston. So I visited South Boston a lot. I'd been to South Boston for Artists for Humanity. So what I'm saying is, when I'm talking about how Boston was, I'm already acknowledging Boston had already changed in my adulthood. When I was a kid, we didn't go to the North End. When I was a little kid, we didn't go to the North End. When I was a teenager, by the late 80s, early 90s, I hung out in the North End. I had friends in the North End. You know what I'm saying? We were going to the North End, hanging out with my friends that lived there. Salute Brandon and Kai. And, hollering at Italian girls named Alyssa, spelled 5 different ways, with, airbrushed overalls. It is what it is. And before the Boston Legends and Mathematic Athletics and the neighborhood campaign kicked off, back in 2018, when we were all hanging out at the old 4 Boston storefront in the North End, that was 2018, 2019? And we brought, everybody was coming through there. So, again, different city. Now, sure, I took the 9 bus or the 10 bus, there and what have you. But there's another thing people ask me about. One of the episodes, Sat Sanders visits Slades. And he says, I ain't been here in 30 years or something like that. And a lot of people were taken aback by that. It was like, how come he hadn't been to Slades in so long? What people need to understand is that while Bill Russell bought Slades either between 1964 and 65, and it's Bill Russell Slades at the time, and everybody knew Slades, Satch had his own space. Satch had Satch's on Stanhope Street, not too far away, because Slades was always in direct competition with what was Bob the Chef's, later Daryl's Corner Kitchen. So it was always Slades and Bob the Chef, which were like a street off from each other. If you get in Slades, you got the Bob the Chef's. If you got the Bob the Chef's, you get the Slades. There's stuff you like the Slades, stuff you like Bob the Chef's. The battle was always between Slades and Bob the Chef's. Now, Satch's was further down, off Stanhope, which is near what was now Back Bay Station. So Satch had his own spot. And that's why, maybe he hadn't been in Slades in a while. Something that needs to be established, even though we talked about it a little bit in the series, is how Casey Jones, Sat Sanders, Sam Jones, and Bill Russell were so integral to being mentors and leaders and there for the kids in that community, the young people in that community, Boston's South End, Lower Roxbury, North Dorchester community. North Dorchester, because in the 60s, it was to signify that we're talking about the part of Dorchester the brown people live in as opposed to Dorchester where the white folks live. So if you go and look, it just specifies North Dorchester. That's why I'm using this term. So they were very much involved in the community, got a bunch of people opportunities, got them jobs, got them in college, looked after them when they were in school. The community was attached to the Boston Celtics, or the Boston Celtics were attached to the community. Whether we're talking about these basketball leagues, whether we're talking about Norfolk House, whether we're talking about Freedom House, whether we're talking about any of the St. Mark's Social Center, we're talking about the Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCA, Roxbury, South End, Dorchester, that Boston Celtics were involved in the community. Okay? That's why we have, the explosion from the BNBL, in 1969, the Boston Shootout in 1972, because there were youth leagues that already existed in the late 50s going into the 60s, which the Boston Celtics were behind in sponsoring. And there are several pictures that John Bain has found of, these kids getting their trophies and meeting with, different Kennedys and different people in office. So whereas in New York, there's the basketball culture in New York and the Knicks fit into it, basketball culture juts out from the Boston Celtics because high school basketball really explodes post World War II. And that's when the Boston Celtics are introduced to the Boston area in 1946-47. And so high school basketball and youth basketball explodes when the Celtics are introduced to Boston. So the Celtics are integral to like the growth of Boston basketball culture, as opposed to the Knicks were a part of New York basketball culture already. Even though, yes, we know that the Tech Tourney started in 1926, but the difference with the Tech Tourney was basketball teams already organized from other leagues and a lot of colleges, not high school. And then it changed. The Tech Tourney became mostly high school before like the MIAA is created, I think in 1972, after the formation of the Boston Shootout and post a couple years after the BNBL was formed in 1969. All right, so when Larry Bird arrives in Boston, the biggest basketball players in Boston were Larry Bird, who just arrived, and a teenager named, I don't know if you heard of him, Patrick Ewing, who played at Cambridge Bridge in Latin. Those were the two big stories in Boston at the time. Then we talk about Dr. J versus Larry Bird. Dr. J and Larry Bird was such a rivalry that in 1983, EA Sports made their first, big basketball sim. And it sold a lot of units, considering not everybody had home computers. It was called One-on-One, Dr. J versus Larry Bird, or was known in the hood as Larry Bird and Dr. J go one-on-one, or Dr. J and Larry Bird go one-on-one. I had it for my Commodore 64. It was on tape, so we put it in the tape drive, and we played it with a joystick that had the joystick like this and had a fire button. One fire button. You tapped it to turn around. You tap it, hold it down to shoot. Let it go to shoot. Hold it to shoot. Yes. And then later on you advance to the special one, where you had the suction cups at the base, and then you had a fire button on the base, fire button on the top of the controller. But yeah, that's something that was really happening. I talked about Robert Parrish. Robert Parrish being somebody I was a big fan of growing up. Robert Parrish had probably one of the greatest all-time seasons as a Celtic in 81-82 that a lot of people don't talk about. He also should have been MVP of the 1982 All-Star Game. They gave it to Larry. Robert Parrish was important because Robert Parrish he was faster than all the centers going up and down the court. He had incredible hands. Robert Parrish could shoot. He was probably one of the best shooting centers out to 18 feet. 15 to 18, had a jumper. He had a rainbow jumper, had an arc on it that was crazy. You couldn't really block it. He had a lefty hook, a righty hook. On both low blocks, he had this devastating baseline spin move. Inside baseline spin move. Get him the ball on the low block. He has his back to you. He spins on the baseline and then did what we call the tomahawk dunk. You were not blocking that. He was so fast. And also, Robert Parrish had amazing hands, and he was a great outlet passer. And the Boston Celtics, the interior passing from the Celtics, I'm sure you've seen footage. Robert Parrish, Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, insane. And then when they got Bill Walton, I challenge somebody to come up with a team of bigs who are better at passing and finding each other. And Larry could just find Chief. And Chief's hands, he caught everything. And yeah, you look at his stats and you're like, he scored 17 points, 18 points, 19 points, Like, that's not a lot of scoring. But look at who else he played with. He played with Max. He played with Kevin McHale. He played with Tiny. He played with DJ. He played with Larry. They shared the ball. They won. It didn't matter if he finished the season with 15.7. You notice he's an all-star for a reason. There's nobody better. So anyway, Robert Parrish. After that, I talked about Larry Wedgeworth and Click's No More Games. It's actually me and Donnie Wahlberg talking about Larry Wedgeworth and Click's No More Games. Larry Wedgeworth, a.k.a. Larry Woo Wedgeworth, rest in peace. He was part of Woo and Worthy with Gordon Megabucks Worthy. Megabucks, the lottery in Boston. They were really big in terms of being a production team. They got a lot of folks signed to different record deals in Boston, had their own group, did a lot of stuff. But No More Games was the official fight song of the Boston Celtics, the 1979-80 Boston Celtics. It was on a record label that put it out right around when the playoffs started. And the Celtics had a 61-21 record. They had the best record in the league. They had won 32 more games than the last season. Everybody thought they had the best record in the league. Everybody was like, oh, they're about to, smash everybody. No More Games comes out. And the bad omen was that as soon as we saw the label was red. The label was red instead of Kelly Green. No More Games comes out. No More Games blows up. No More Games gets hot. By the time No More Games, and I keep saying No More Games, by the time No More Games is big, it's kind of a hit. The Celtics already got knocked out the playoffs by the 76ers. So No More Games takes on a whole nother meaning. But No More Games takes on another meaning when the next season comes out. Just the thing is that there's a break in No More Games where it says everybody on the roster. Those people ain't on the roster anymore the next season. The Celtics switch up the entire roster. Red Auerbach, they cover it. Red Auerbach in the 1980 draft, he makes a deal, swings, gets Robert Parrish, gets Kevin McHale. And, they win the championship in 81 versus, unfortunately, the Houston Rockets. And now, we jump ahead to Andrew Toney. I would talk to people who made Celtics City periodically. And it didn't have a name yet. But there would be people that would just come up to me and like, Darren Adams, can I shake your hand? Shake your hand. Like, wow, you did a great job on the Celtics, docuseries and all sort of stuff. I'm like, thanks. Like, it doesn't have a release date. Nobody's told me your name or what have you. So, and again, I shot my two interviews. I did one long interview with a lot of breaks. That's me sitting in the hoodie. That's in every episode, all 9 episodes, which is amazing. That one long interview with a lot of breaks because we stopped and asked questions to elaborate on stuff. And then I talked to the producers about certain things, and it led to, certain people being involved. Like, one of me talking about certain things in a break led to, it was like, hey, do you think you could get a New Edition involved? And I was like, yeah, definitely. I could get you in touch with Biv and the guys, especially Bell Biv DeVoe, because, my boy Cyrus the Shield, shout out Cyrus the Shield, he's produced with these guys, he knows them really well. And I was like, so I'll probably get you contacted him through Cyrus. This apartment used to be Cyrus the Shield's family apartment before I moved in over 25 years ago. So that's something important. And so through Cyrus, we were able to get Bell Biv DeVoe involved in the project. And me sitting there doing these interviews, took on a life of its own, which is dope. But I talked about Andrew Toney, and I couldn't stand Andrew Toney. I hated that man. So when we did the screening, they screened episode 5 for the people. And I'm just like, okay. And it was very surreal to be sitting in there in a room with hundreds of people, some of whom are people you looked up to your entire life. Some of them are former Celtics, some of them are current Celtics, some of them are family of Celtics, some of them are journalists, creators, all these other things. And you look up at the screen and you see your face. It's weird. So anyway, I talked about Andrew Toney, and I was talking to the director, Lauren, and she was like, yeah, especially what you said about Andrew Toney, and I'm laughing. What the hell did I say about Andrew Toney? Because Andrew Toney, that shows up in episode 4. I did these interviews May 2023, and the interview with Howard on the bench in Peters Park in August 2023. It was February 2025 when Lauren says that. I don't remember what the hell I said about Andrew Toney. So they give us the link to the screeners, and I see it, and I'm like, oh, that's what I said about Andrew Toney. Yeah, I hate Andrew Toney. Now, the Beat LA chant happens because the Boston Celtics fans are like, look, if you're going to beat us, at least beat the Lakers. And what pissed us off the most is that they didn't beat the Lakers that year. And then the year where we thought we were better than them, they actually beat the Lakers. But the year that they beat the Lakers, I don't think the Celtics were as good as them. I think the Celtics were not going to beat the 76ers in 83. They quit on Bill Fitch, whatever. They were gonna lose to the 76ers in 83 regardless. I don't care what anybody says. I get that they're like, oh, we squandered an opportunity, maybe in 82, but you know, you were not going to. Now, we're getting to the end. We're almost at 30 minutes. I want to run through this. There's a clip when I'm talking about Spike Lee guest editing the October 1990 issue of Spin, and what he said about a dude wearing, you know, Boston gear, calling him an Uncle Tom. Boston sucks. I read that issue when I was sitting in George's Barbershop, which is on at the corner of Tremont and Mass Ave. It was back in, again, October 1990, sitting in that chair waiting to get a cut. I was 15, and I was pissed off because Bell Biv DeVoe were also in that issue. And I was like, how you going to call a black man rocking Celtics gear Uncle Tom for being a Bostonian and repping his hometown team? And I remember being 15, I was like, if I had seen Spike Lee, I would have run up on that dude. And this isn't some Stephen A. Smith, you know, I would have put hands on him and would have got handled. I would have beat the shit out of Spike Lee. And I got to tell you, even as a 50-year-old, I get it, but I kind of would probably ragdoll that motherfucker or explain to him how he radicalized me at a young age. But in my head, I'm still thinking, fucking disrespect my city. Now, that being said, I mentioned the song Air Hoodlum. Down the beat, picked by anyone but the Celtics. And I remember buying that Public Enemy tape and feeling like I had been fucking personally attacked by Chuck D. And that stuck with me so much, that song Air Hoodlum and that line, that, as you know, I've done a lot of, you know, classes and speaking engagements and panels and things of that nature. The first time I was hooked up on a couple of panels by Sky of Skyhook Radio. What up, Sky? And this is what, 2010, 2011-ish? And I was on a panel with Chuck D. And during the break in the panel, I asked Chuck, I got a question. He's like, oh, it should be good. And I known him through Harry Allen for years. And I said, I have a question for you about a song that you did, Air Hoodlum. And he was like, okay, I knew this was coming. And Air Hoodlum, you say down the beat, picked by anyone but the Celtics. But it's weird because you cheering for the Celtics now. So what happened? And he was like, all right, let me explain this to you. Again, I'm a sports fan. And I know the game inside and out, all right? You know as well as anybody that Greatest Misses was a collection of songs we had already recorded that didn't make it to an album. So Air Hoodlum is made around 1990, 91-ish. And what happened is, and I know you remember this, John Barry got drafted by the Boston Celtics. And I'm like, oh, I already know where this is going. And John Barry got drafted as a point guard, combo guard. And when you looked at the Celtics roster, he already knew. You got DJ, you got this guy, you got Sherman Douglas, you got John Bagley, and then, you got this other guy, Brian Shaw, who played guard. You had all these people ahead of him. And he knew he wasn't going to get any minutes. And then before that, when Casey Jones was still in town, Casey Jones did not like playing rookies. So when you add all that in, down to be picked by anyone but the Celtics was a rationale or a thought process that a lot of players had, including a white boy who was John Barry. Like, he did not want to go to Boston so bad that he refused to report. The Celtics were forced to trade him. So we said, that's why I did that in Air Hoodlum, down to be picked by anyone but the Celtics. Not so much as I don't want to go to Boston. But that was the takeaway when people heard it. And I'm like, oh, wow. He says, because it's coming off Anti-Nigga Machine. The same shit they pulled up there in Boston off of Fear of a Black Planet. Which actually would be, the anniversary will be April 10th. So I was like, wow. Thanks for clearing that up. That's interesting. Now, there's a clip used where it's, of course, Spike Lee's, Do the Right Thing. There's that clip used right there. But there was supposed to be another clip used when I'm talking about, like, the perception of Boston by people outside of Boston. It didn't get used because I don't think the producer was able to find it in time. But I directed him to it. The beginning of The Wood by Rick Famuyiwa. They're talking to Mike. And it's like, Mike, you play basketball? He's like, I play baseball. And he says, I don't play that white boy shit. You know what I'm saying? He's like, what do you think, this is Boston? We don't do that Boston shit. Basketball. And I remember watching The Wood, which I paid for with my own money. And I was there with my brother and his then girlfriend. And I'm in a theater full of black and brown folks in Boston, a packed theater, to see The Wood opening night. And everybody groans. Just bullshit again. Oh, man, I'm sick of this shit. Every fucking time I'm able to say this shit. Say this shit again, man. Say, what was this white boy shit, man? Get a movie a break. Let's just get to it. Maybe, that's the only time they do some dumb shit like that. But, yeah. So you have to sit there as a black Bostonian and deal with other people's, idea of what your city is or who lives there. And you're like, when do we ever get to respond? When do we ever get to have our take? When do we ever have our voices heard? When? God, when? But yeah, it's hilarious that I get to see myself actually talking about, that perception of Boston, and then actually getting to speak on behalf of Belle Biv DeVoe, who I was responsible for getting into Celtics City, which was dope because if you know anything, I was also in Belle Biv DeVoe at Fenway Park, which screened on Nesson, which nobody outside of Boston has seen, which is interesting. I would really love for more people to be able to see that, however to make that possible to bring to more people. So, yeah. And then there's me talking about Len Bias. And yes, Len Bias was somebody who coaches in the ACC who also saw Michael Jordan, will collectively agree that that's a dude that would bust Michael Jordan's ass. And they used to say the only person that could stop Michael Jordan was Dean Smith. Mike couldn't stop Len Bias. Len Bias was 6'8", 6'9". He had a power and finesse game. He could shoot. He could play in the post. He could run. He could jump. He had touch. He could play bully ball if he had to. He could pass, rebound, everything. And I truly believe that if Len Bias had lived, the Boston Celtics would have repeated and won the championship in 1987. And I also believe, I'll take it a step further, if they enter the 1987 NBA draft and they have the number 23 pick, they still pick Reggie Lewis. So the Celtics would have had Len Bias and Reggie Lewis in back-to-back drafts, regardless. Because that year, Reggie Lewis went to the Portsmouth Invitational, and he was injured. So he couldn't improve his draft stock any. And that's why the Celtics still would have had him. Because had he played in the Portsmouth Invitational, there's no way he would have been there available at 22 or 23. No way. And that's just fact. So I think that's pretty much everything that I had here to on my list of things to cover about Celtics City. And I'm probably going to do one of these after episodes 6, 7, and 8 air and cover that. So yeah, thanks for bearing with me. 1